Oh, faithfully sharing value and interpreting the world's best books. Hi, this is Sally with the Book Talk. Today we're diving into a book titled The Life of Linnaeus. So, who is Linnaeus? Well, maybe a lot of folks aren't familiar, but you've got to know about the Nobel Prize. The body that picks the winners every year is the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, set up in 1739. And get this, Linnaeus was one of its founders and even its first president. As a famous 18th century naturalist, he made two huge contributions. First off, he laid the groundwork for modern biological classification. He invented the sexual system, grouping plants by their stamen and pistil shapes. This method was way more effective than others at the time. It dominated European plant taxonomy from the 1730s all the way to the 1820s. Secondly, he established binomial nomenclature. So basically, this method names everything in the world using Latin. If you visit a botanical garden or natural history museum, there's a name tag by each plant or animal. Under the Chinese name, you'll spot its Latin name. Oh, such a vast number of species find their place in this Latin naming system. It's truly a remarkable achievement. So, how did Linnaeus pull this off? The author, Wilfrid Blunt, is a member of London's Linnean Society. He drew on tons of scholarly work on Linnaeus, plus manuscripts and collections kept by the Society after Linnaeus passed, giving us a peek into the science life of Linnaeus, the Prince of Botany. Linnaeus's full name is Carl Linnaeus, born in 1707 in Småland province, southern Sweden. And his dad was Nils. Father Nils was a pastor who loved nature, planting loads of plants in their garden. So Linnaeus knew many plants from a young age and had his own little world. He called the family garden Carl's Garden and became a little botanist there. This experience was super precious to Linnaeus. Even later in life, looking back, he felt it gave him an uncontrollable love for flowers. From then on, he saw fate guiding him forward. However, his parents had different plans for his future. In their eyes, messing with plants and flowers would only lead to becoming a poor gardener someday. They hoped Linnaeus would follow in his father's footsteps and become a respected pastor. To become a pastor, he had to master subjects like Greek, Hebrew, theology, metaphysics, and rhetoric during secondary school. But young Linnaeus had zero interest in any of these courses. Although he showed some interest in Latin, physics, and math, his grades remained mediocre and unremarkable. Like many ambitious parents today, Linnaeus's folks banned him from playing in the garden or handling plants. Yet his passion for nature and plants never faded. In 1727, 20-year-old Linnaeus enrolled at Lund University to study medicine. The next year, he transferred to Uppsala University to continue his education. Medical faculties in 18th century Europe weren't like modern medical schools, focused solely on human diseases and treatments. They covered broad fields including zoology, botany, and chemistry, which explains why Linnaeus chose medicine. Uppsala University was Sweden's finest then, just over 60 kilometers from Stockholm, often called the Cambridge of Sweden. Yet in the early 1700s, Swedish education and research lagged far behind Europe. Even Uppsala's top-ranked medical program had rudimentary facilities, no clinical courses or proper labs. Its neglected botanical garden housed just 200 plant species, failing to inspire research. Worse, newly arrived Linnaeus faced financial hardship after his parents cut support for abandoning theology. He had to support himself, but mentors' selfless aid kept his quest alive. Two key figures emerged. Olaf Celsius, creator of the Celsius scale, theology professor and natural history enthusiast, and Olaf Rudbeck. Both were decades older and established. So what is natural history? It's humanity's ancient engagement with nature, macro-level study of animals, plants, minerals, and ecosystems. Broadly speaking, natural history also includes astronomy, geography, meteorology, physiology, and so on. Under the broad framework of natural history, Celsius was widely knowledgeable and deeply researched in botany. It's said that Linnaeus, upon first arriving at Uppsala University, met Celsius by chance in the botanical garden, and through plant discussions, they became close friends despite the age gap. Celsius selflessly provided Linnaeus with food and lodging and allowed him to manage and use his extensive book collection. You could say it was Celsius who helped Linnaeus gain a firm footing at the university. Um, Having covered Celsius, let's look at Linnaeus's second mentor, Rudbeck. He was a medical professor at Uppsala University, responsible not only for anatomy and pharmacology, but also for teaching botany and zoology. Rudbeck also greatly admired Linnaeus's talent and brilliance in botany. He invited Linnaeus to live in his home, took him on field trips, and secured special funding for him. When Linnaeus was just in his second year, Rudbeck, citing his old age, had Linnaeus take over teaching the university's botany course. This gave the young Linnaeus immense encouragement, spurring him to work twice as hard. Apart from these two age-spanning friends, Linnaeus had another classmate who deeply influenced him. He was Peter Artedi. When Linnaeus first entered Uppsala University, he had already heard Artedi's name. Artedi was 2 years older than Linnaeus and was widely regarded as the smartest student in the medical faculty. At that time, Artedi was delving into biological classification, which was also something Linnaeus was very interested in. The two young men hit it off right away. Artedi was passionate about animal classification, while Linnaeus was more interested in plant classification. So they agreed to collaborate on biological classification research. The 18th century, when Linnaeus lived, was a time of great development for natural history in Europe. Naturalists from various countries collected and studied all kinds of European plants and animals, and explorers brought back numerous new species from around the world. How to classify these plants and animals became an urgent problem for the intellectual community to solve. Take plants as an example. There were many classification methods back then, one of which used flower color to categorize plants, but this had obvious issues. Some plants can bloom in various colors. For instance, roses mentioned earlier come in red, white, pink, and many other hues. They're clearly the same type of plant, yet different plants can have identical flower colors. This classification method is obviously superficial. Facing these unsuccessful ideas, which plant characteristic should we actually use for classification? Linnaeus fell into deep thought when a paper titled On the Structure of Flowers caught his attention. The paper explained the role of stamens and pistils in plant reproduction. After reading it, Linnaeus began examining every flower he could find, studying their stamen and pistil structures. Linnaeus vaguely sensed that classifying plants by their reproductive systems might be a good approach. He wrote preliminary dissertation on the marriage of plants on this theme. Starting from this paper, a new plant classification system gradually took shape. Reading thousands of books and traveling thousands of miles, fieldwork and peer exchanges are essential for any successful naturalist. Linnaeus was no exception. His ultimate biological classification system and European fame stemmed from two crucial journeys. These two journeys were the Lapland expedition and the Continental Europe tour. Let's first discuss the Lapland journey. Though Linnaeus undertook many expeditions, his Lapland journey at 25 was his first long-term fieldwork and his most arduous ever. This expedition allowed Linnaeus to test his budding plant classification method. Lapland refers to Europe's northernmost region, the vast Arctic Circle areas of northern Sweden, Norway, and Finland. Today, this area is a travel hotspot for northern lights and midnight sun experiences. But 3 centuries ago, living conditions here were brutally harsh. Few besides indigenous people ventured there. During his nearly half-year expedition, Linnaeus traveled 5,000 kilometers, thoroughly documenting the region's natural resources and indigenous survival. Of course, what fascinated Linnaeus most was the local flora. After the expedition, he wrote Flora Lapponica, based on his extensive plant specimens. In this book, he first outlined his plant classification system, calling it the sexual system. So, what is the sexual system? Simply put, it classifies plants based on their reproductive organs, centering on the flower. At that time, most plants people studied were flowering ones. Well, Linnaeus's classification system grouped plants based on the number and characteristics of their stamens. He divided flowering plants into 23 major categories called classes. For example, canna with just one stamen went into the Monandria class, stamen classes. Irises with 3 stamens were classified in the Triandria class. Plants with the same stamen count could be further subdivided based on pistil morphology. Take lilies. They've got 6 stamens and 1 pistil, so they're in Hexandria monogynia. Daffodils also have 6 stamens but 3 pistils, placing them in Hexandria trigonia. For non-flowering plants, Linnaeus grouped them into the 24th class, Cryptogamia. Crypto, meaning hidden, the basic framework of modern plant classification, actually evolved from Linnaeus's system. Linnaeus's plant classification was profoundly significant work in natural history. To people back then, Newton's mechanics revealed the universe's mysteries, while Linnaeus's plant classification outlined life's framework. After all, only with a clear cognitive structure could people move beyond basic plant identification and devote energy to deeper research. However, his book Flora Lapponica got little attention back in Sweden. So, to spread awareness of his classification system, Linnaeus embarked on a 3-year continental European journey, lasting from April 1735 to June 1738. This trip took him through Germany, the Netherlands, England, and France. These nations were then the world's scientific research hubs. What we'll focus on here is Linnaeus's Dutch experience. The Netherlands was where Linnaeus stayed longest during his continental tour. It was also there that his botanical ideas gained recognition and began spreading. Speaking of the Netherlands, in the 17th century, they were known as the sea carrier, with formidable national power and advanced research institutions like universities. Linnaeus's first action upon arriving in Holland was to obtain a local degree. Though he'd studied at Sweden's Uppsala University, that qualification wasn't widely recognized in continental Europe. So Linnaeus headed to Harderwijk in the Netherlands, specifically to earn a broadly accepted degree. Linnaeus arrived in Harderwijk and enrolled at the local university, submitting his already prepared medical dissertation, New Theory on the Cause of Intermittent Fevers. After passing the defense, he smoothly earned his medical doctorate at 28. But this doctorate was just a stepping stone into research. Like most degree holders from Harderwijk who wanted to pursue science, Linnaeus headed to Leiden, the Dutch hub of scientific research. Holland's most renowned naturalist, Herman Boerhaave, lived in Leiden. By then, Boerhaave was nearly 70 and retired. Still, he remained an unshakable authority in Dutch natural history. It's said that anyone interested in science wouldn't leave Holland without paying homage to Dr. Boerhaave first. Linnaeus was the same. To get his plant classification system widely accepted, he first needed Boerhaave's approval. After some struggles, Linnaeus finally met this esteemed senior and presented him with the Flora Lapponica manuscript. So, how did he gain the senior's recognition? Well, there's a story. In Boerhaave's private botanical garden, there was a very rare tree. Boerhaave thought no one had described it, but Linnaeus recognized it instantly as a sorbus species detailed in a book called Paris Plants. Boerhaave had that book and checked it immediately. Linnaeus was spot on. Linnaeus's vast botanical knowledge and talent impressed Boerhaave, and they soon became close friends. Boerhaave saw the importance of Linnaeus's plant classification work. Through his recommendation, Linnaeus started gaining fame in natural history circles. During this time, Linnaeus also met his former classmate from Uppsala University in Leiden. Ardeti, as mentioned, was deeply into animal classification. After the old friends met by chance at an inn, they worked together for over 2 months, until Ardeti tragically drowned while studying fish. His close friend's death left Linnaeus heartbroken. Ardeti left all his manuscripts to Linnaeus, and his animal kingdom research became a valuable supplement to Linnaeus's biological classification system. During this period, Linnaeus was writing Systema Naturae, a book that showcased his extraordinary ambition. In the book, Linnaeus expanded the scope of classification to all natural things, dividing them into 3 kingdoms: plants, animals, and minerals. Besides the plant classification we've already covered, Linnaeus divided animals into 6 major groups: quadrupeds, birds, amphibians, fish, insects, and invertebrates. Later, Linnaeus unified the classification principles for plants and animals. From a reproductive perspective, he changed the quadrupeds group to mammals. In 1735, Systema Naturae was officially published in Leiden, marking the establishment of Linnaeus's biological classification system. Its publication caused a sensation in Europe's natural history circles. Major botanical gardens across Europe adopted Linnaeus's method to classify plants, and it proved that Linnaeus's classification was highly convenient and practical, earning him great reputation. In 1736, Linnaeus was invited to visit England. By this time, Linnaeus was no longer the unknown newcomer he'd been when first arriving in Holland. He visited London and Oxford, meeting British naturalist authorities like Hans Sloane, Peter Collinson, Philip Miller, and others, and toured major British botanical gardens. Before Linnaeus's visit to England, his works had already spread there. At that time, observations of plants and animals weren't as detailed as today's, and research on stamens wasn't particularly deep. Oh, some people were skeptical about Linnaeus's classification method. Botanist Johann Jacob de Linnaeus was one of them. He questioned Linnaeus's classification of many plants and marked NB in Linnaeus's book. De Linnaeus took a flower from the botanical garden to verify the validity of Linnaeus's classification. Linnaeus placed this plant in the Monandria class, but de Linnaeus thought it had 3 stamens, claiming Linnaeus's classification was wrong. But when the flower opened, de Linnaeus was almost shocked. It indeed had only 1 stamen. Later, many of Linnaeus's views were continuously confirmed. De Linnaeus couldn't help but admire this young naturalist, and Linnaeus's fame spread in England. Linnaeus returned from England to Holland and continued his research and writing in 1737. He published 4 more works: Ortes Cliffortianus, Flora Lapponica, Genera Plantarum, and Critica Botanica. Now in his 30s, Linnaeus had been away from home for years, missing his homeland, family, and fiancée deeply. Plus, constant travel had exhausted him, both physically and mentally, so he decided to return to Sweden. On his journey home, Linnaeus visited Paris, France. By now, 30-year-old Linnaeus was recognized across Dutch, British, and French naturalist circles as a rising star. Many universities offered him positions with generous terms, urging him to stay, but Linnaeus was determined to leave. In June 1738, he returned to his homeland, Sweden. Truthfully, after returning to Sweden in 1738, things weren't smooth sailing for Linnaeus. Swedish society at the time showed little interest in his research. Fortunately, Linnaeus had his Dutch medical doctorate. Facing family pressures, he became a doctor in Stockholm. His exceptional skills quickly won Swedish royal favor. He even became a naval physician. After practicing medicine in Stockholm for a year, Linnaeus secured a position back at Uppsala University, and Uppsala appointed him medical professor, overseeing botany, nutrition, pharmacology, and botanical garden management. Linnaeus managed Uppsala Botanical Garden for the rest of his life, giving him a stable research base. He maintained long-term royal ties, securing ample research funding. In Uppsala, Linnaeus meticulously revised Systema Naturae, striving for perfection. As mentioned earlier, the first 1,735 Leiden edition was just 14 thin pages outlining the classification system. By 1768, after 12 revisions, it swelled to over 2,300 pages, cataloging more than 10,000 known species with classified entries. And during this massive project, Linnaeus achieved another critical feat: unifying biological naming. Systema Naturae had clarified biological classification, establishing modern taxonomy's framework. But another major problem still plagued naturalists: biological naming. Before Linnaeus, biological naming was highly arbitrary. Naturalists naming new species use their native languages. Even scholars from the same country might give different names to identical species, creating chaotic confusion that hindered natural history's progress. Linnaeus realized this problem very early on. Before returning home, he published Genera Plantarum and Critica Botanica, books that already started tackling this issue. However, the problem wasn't fully solved until he published Species Plantarum in Sweden in 1753. In this book, Linnaeus cataloged over 5,900 plant species, naming them all with binomial nomenclature. So, what is binomial nomenclature? Simply put, it's a method using Latin to name plants with a genus name and species name. Also, after the name, you usually add the discoverer or namer's abbreviation. For instance, Linnaeus named about 7,100 plant species and 4,400 animal species in his lifetime. After these organisms' Latin names, you'll see Linnaeus's abbreviation L with a dot. This naming credit encourages first namers and hugely boosted species naming standardization. Take the rose we know. Its Latin name is Rosa rugosa thun. There's a dot after it. Rosa is the genus, rugosa the species, and thun with a dot is the abbreviation of its first namer, Thunberg. This Thunberg was Linnaeus's student. Though roses were known for ages, standard naming only came after Linnaeus's system. Binomial nomenclature spread with classification because Latin avoided naming chaos from other European languages. Of course, its quick adoption also came from Linnaeus's authority in natural history circles. King Louis XV of France even issued a decree promoting Linnaeus's systems. Using Linnaeus's methods became an unstoppable trend in natural history that continues today. Beyond research, Linnaeus also gathered students globally to spread his natural history methods. In the author's view, his relationship with students resembled Jesus and the 12 apostles. With Swedish royal funding, Linnaeus sent students worldwide. They took his books everywhere and brought back plants, animals, and specimens for study. For example, Thunberg, who named the rose, as mentioned earlier, was one of Linnaeus's most famous students. During his lifetime, he traveled to Africa, Indonesia, Japan, and other places, and became Linnaeus's successor at Uppsala University. Well, it's worth mentioning that in his later years, Linnaeus also served as the first president of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Now, the most famous Nobel Prize is awarded by the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. By the 20th century, it and the UK's Royal Society, France's Académie des Sciences, and Russia's Academy of Sciences were known as the world's top 4 scientific institutions. Linnaeus's pioneering work was indispensable. In 1778, Linnaeus died at the age of 71. The Swedish king personally gave a speech at the funeral, expressing grief over Linnaeus's death. After his passing, Linnaeus left not only his classification system and binomial nomenclature, but also 26 large boxes of legacy. When people opened these big boxes, they found over 19,000 plant specimens, 3,200 insect specimens, 1,500 shell specimens, 700 coral specimens, 2,500 mineral specimens, 3,000 books, and over 3,000 letters in 1784. These legacies were transported to the Linnean Society in London for permanent preservation. Though Linnaeus's huge success in natural history ignited intense interest in the subject across European society at his time, Linnaeus had many contemporary fans, and here I'll mention the most famous ones. Um, the first fan was the French Enlightenment thinker Rousseau. Uh, Rousseau once wrote, "Even just imitating this professor from Uppsala would win me some happy times and years of inner peace." Many of Rousseau's works were influenced by Linnaeus, such as Émile, which advocates natural education for children, inspired by the natural life of Laplanders, described by Linnaeus. For this, Rousseau specifically sent a message to Linnaeus expressing his admiration. The letter said, "Tell him I think no one in the world is greater than he is." The second fan was Britain's Erasmus Darwin. He was the grandfather of Charles Darwin, who founded evolutionary theory. Erasmus Darwin lived in the same era as Linnaeus and was a famous physician, poet, and botanist. He greatly admired Linnaeus's ideas and wrote a long poem, The Loves of the Plants, based on Linnaeus's plant classification system. Meanwhile, he also made significant contributions to science. Building on Linnaeus's classification system, he noted species variability and proposed the concept of shared ancestry among different organisms. This idea suggests that diverse plant forms follow patterns of inheritance and evolution, essentially the emergence of evolutionary theory. The third admirer was Germany's writer and thinker Goethe. Goethe was fascinated by natural history in his youth. After Linnaeus's death, he wrote, "Besides Shakespeare and Spinoza, no deceased person has influenced me more deeply than Linnaeus." Even today, in Uppsala, many of Linnaeus's admirers still make pilgrimages. I'll conclude this book's interpretation with a fan's words. "Though oceans and mountains may divide us, we trust that before death's curtain falls, the Father of wisdom and science will unveil and clear our path." Perhaps I'd find myself seated on the grass, where Linnaeus explains the world's wonders to pure souls, praising the Creator's marvelous shaping of minds. All right, that wraps up our discussion of The Life of Linnaeus. You'll find reading notes below the audio. See you tomorrow.